Our next speaker is Andrea Renda. He is Professor of Digital Innovation at College of Europe in Belgium. He is also advisor to the European Commission on matters of AI and digital innovation. Please allow me to introduce Andrea Renda, who will be speaking about Europe's secret sauce for trustworthy AI.
Thank you. Thanks everybody, and thanks for joining for this. It's going to be a quick presentation of something that is ongoing, which is something that you never wanted to hear about, which is potentially setting rules for artificial intelligence. And this is what the European Union is typically specialized in. So we felt the urge to do something about it. You know, Europe is very famous, and the European Commission in particular is very famous for setting rules on this. I don't belong to the European Commission, as Alexander correctly said. I am an academic. I work in a think tank called Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, and I teach courses on digital innovation in Bruges, not very far from here in the end, at the College of Europe. So the first thing that I will say is absolutely obvious, okay, that there is consensus on AI's enormous potential. Look around. You see applications, you see use cases, you see proofs of concepts, you see products and services that are being developed. Economists and social scientists agree on the fact that this is something that can really change the world. It depends on how we use it. It can change the world for good. It can change the world for bad. And it depends very much on how we use it. And that's my main stance in this presentation, that we need to make sure that we use it for good. Indeed, if you look at the literature in academia, typically the idea is that there is potentially no alternative to using digital technologies and AI if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, if we want to put the Earth and the planet back on a sustainability path. So if you look at how these technologies are developing today, we see that there are a number of concerns, a number of challenges, together with the opportunities. And typically, when you're a policymaker, that's what you want to deal with. You know, maximizing the opportunities, but at the same time, make sure that the challenges don't appear and don't surface along the way, potentially undermining the big potential of this set of technologies. The first is the fact that, as the previous speaker was saying, this technology is very much data hungry, especially when you talk about machine learning and its related technologies and techniques. And in this respect, we know that the data that we use in most cases is not perfect, is not perfectly representative of reality, and even when it is, reality is not perfect, and reality is biased. And sometimes we need to make sure that bias that is in reality or in the data doesn't creep into the design and development of AI products. And this is something that sometimes happens spontaneously on the side of developers. Sometimes data ethics is developed. You know, we see this developing also across developers around the world. But there are other cases in which this is not happening. I'm going to give you very flashy examples of this. There is also an emerging trilemma, how I call it, between the most accurate and effective techniques in AI development, in particular in deep learning family of techniques, and the explainability of these technologies. So for people that grew up studying social science like me, and the people that draft laws like the European Commission, sometimes we say, following Winston Churchill, that the two things that you don't want to know how they're made are sausages and laws, right? And the challenge here is that we don't want to add algorithms to this family of things that we don't want to know how they're made. In some cases, we need to know what's inside and how these things take decisions. There is a related risk that whenever we delegate to technology too much decision making, there is a loss of agency and self-determination on the side of end users and human beings in general. There are cases, especially when we talk about job displacement, in which there might be incentives on the side of firms to over-automate, meaning even accepting losses in quality if the cost reduction that you can achieve with machines is greater. And this is potentially causing already in some cases a weakening of the bargaining power of workers and potentially a lack of social cohesion. And also more generally, technologies might go in a direction that is not really the one that we would want in the whole Europe. Think about the demonstrations that were triggered by Greta Thunberg recently, but more generally the need that we have to avoid that the environment is deteriorated and is disrupted too much by our current economy. AI can do something about it. It can also exacerbate the current problems. So just very quickly, to go into a number of more visual, let's say, elaborations on what I've already said. Digital technologies and technologies in AI are potentially of many, many different types. Some of you might be using some of these techniques and not others. The big fuzz currently is on the top left on deep learning, and inside that things like reinforcement learning and so on. But if you look at this graph here, some of these techniques that are the most accurate are also the least explicable or explainable when it comes to the side of the user interface. Other technologies are a bit more explainable but are less accurate. So we create an environment in which companies have to maximize the accuracy and the effectiveness and efficiency of what they do. We might end up in a situation in which someone in the room is waiting for a kidney and is denied a kidney in favor of somebody else, and the decision is not explained. Or so, less dramatically, someone is denied a loan because it's not creditworthy and there's no explanation. Or you apply to have access to documents owned by government and government says no and doesn't explain why. I mean, in all these cases, and if you put on top of this the legislation that we have at the EU level, such as the GDPR, which contains a provision, don't faint when I say GDPR, but contains a provision that requires that end users are given a meaningful explanation whenever there is a decision making that is automated and touches upon their personal data. There is enough room for doing something in policy terms at the EU level on this, meaning there might be cases in which we require a meaningful explanation of how these systems have decided. The issue of control over machines has of course surfaced recently with the Ethiopian Airlines crash. We had a situation in which pilots have to deal with a machine that is perfectly working, but it has received a flawed data. And the machine is convinced that it's positioned, the airplane is positioned somewhere else and it needs to go down. And that person, the pilot, goes through 19 different attempts to activate the very complicated procedure that would be needed to override the machine, and fails to do so, and the airplane crashes. So what we're trying to decide here is what kind of balance are we supposed to have between the man and the machine, and whether there is the possibility to override the decision-making of machines should be given in a meaningful way and not in a way that is exaggerated. So this is triggering a lot of reflections also inside EU institutions. There are cases in which automated decision-making and advice given by machines, such as in this case, which is predictive policing that is used in many cities, is asked to use existing data and patterns of past crime to indicate areas where crime, according to the algorithm, is about to happen. And sometimes this is called the minority report type of system, if you wish. And of course, it sounds very fascinating, but in the end, if this uses historical data, the algorithm always sends police troops in the same ghettos, right? And if some areas are more inspected than others, and if some areas have more records of crimes than others, then these will be the ones that will rank first. That's why what happens, for example, a famous case in ProPublica 2016 in the United States, a case of deciding whether to give parole to this guy or that lady. I don't have time to tell you the story behind, but I can tell you that for a human it would have been pretty clear that this guy was most dangerous than the lady. But the system gives the score that you see there, high risk. Also because African Americans are overrepresented in the crime records in the United States, and an African American, if you go especially in the Midwest, statistically has a 60% higher likelihood of being pulled over by